Listen closely, and perhaps you can still hear it, the distant, rhythmic tread of thousands of leather sandaled feet on a rain-soaked British road, the faint clatter of armor and spear, a sound that once meant order and empire. It is the ghost of a heartbeat, the echo of a legion on the march. The 9th Legion, the Hispania, was one of the oldest and most respected fighting forces in the entire Roman army. It had fought under Julius Caesar, it had helped conquer a continent, and its battle standards were a testament to centuries of unwavering service. Then, sometime around the year 120 of our common era, it simply vanished. The entire legion, over 5,000 men, disappeared from the historical record, leaving behind one of the most tantalizing and enduring mysteries of the ancient world. It is a puzzle that has captivated historians and dreamers for nearly 2,000 years, a true historical ghost story, and tonight, it is the perfect tale to let your mind wander through as you begin to drift off to sleep. Imagine the sheer scale of such a disappearance. A force equivalent to a modern brigade, a complete, self-contained community of soldiers, craftsmen, and medics, along with all their equipment, their pay, their sacred eagles, all of it gone, without a clear contemporaneous account to tell us why. It is a silence in history more deafening than any battle cry. Did they march north from their fortress at York into the misty, unconquered highlands of Caledonia, to be annihilated in a fierce ambush by the painted tribes of the north? Were they quietly transferred to a different, far-flung corner of the empire, only for the paperwork of their reassignment to be lost to the relentless decay of time? Or does the truth lie in a more gradual, more haunting dissolution whittled away in endless small border conflicts, their ranks not filled, their identity slowly fading until the legion itself was just a memory, its name quietly retired from the army list? This is the power of a great historical mystery. It is not merely a question to be answered, but a doorway into a lost world. It invites us to step beyond the solid facts and into the realm of shadow and speculation, to feel the chill of the northern mist and ponder the fates of thousands of individual lives. As we explore the evidence and the theories tonight, let the story wash over you. There is no need to solve the puzzle right now. Instead, let the narrative itself carry you away, a gentle current of history and imagination. We are about to travel back to the very edge of the Roman world, to a time of frontier forts and distant wars, to follow the cold trail of the lost nine. So find a comfortable position, let your breathing slow, and allow the echoes of the past to lull you into a state of deep relaxation. The mystery of the 9th Legion awaits. To understand the weight of this disappearance, we must first appreciate the sheer substance of what was lost. The 9th Legion was no newly raised unit of raw recruits. It was an institution forged in the fire of Rome's rise to empire. Its story begins not in the mists of Britain, but decades earlier, in the brutal final days of the Roman Republic. The legion was most likely raised by the famed General Pompey the Great, but it was under the command of Gaius Julius Caesar that it truly earned its stripes. During the epic Gallic Wars, the 9th fought with ferocious loyalty for Caesar, battling fierce Celtic tribes across what is now modern France. They were there at the pivotal siege of Alesia, where Caesar finally broke the Gallic chieftain Vercingetorix, a victory that secured a vast new territory for Rome and cemented Caesar's own legendary status. This was the crucible that hardened them, transforming them from a collection of soldiers into a brotherhood of veterans. After Caesar's assassination, the legion, like so much of Rome, was caught in the chaotic power struggles that followed. It found itself on the losing side of the civil war, fighting for Mark Antony against the future first Emperor Augustus. Yet, in a testament to its value, Augustus not only spared the 9th but integrated it fully into his new professional imperial army. It was during this early imperial period that the legion earned its enduring title, Hispana. stationed in the rugged, war-torn province of Hispania, now Spain. It spent years in a grueling campaign to subdue the last holdouts of native resistance in the Cantabrian mountains. This was a brutal, grinding war of attrition fought in difficult terrain, and it was here that the Ninth solidified its reputation for relentless endurance. The title Hispana was a badge of honor, a permanent reminder of a hard-won victory in a harsh land. By the time the legion was transferred to the northern frontier, it was a pillar of the Roman military machine. Its history was a living thing woven into the very fabric of its identity. The soldiers would have known the stories of their predecessors, the battles they fought, the commanders they served, the standards they protected with their lives. This created an esprit de corps, a deep-seated pride that was palpable. They were part of something far larger than themselves, a continuous line of history stretching back to the Republic itself. When the Ninth marched into Britain in the invasion force of Emperor Claudius in 43 AD, they were among the most seasoned and reliable troops available. They helped secure the initial beachhead and then pushed inward, fighting in the famous Battle of the Medway, a chaotic and bloody crossing of a wide river against determined British chariots. They were, by every measure, an elite force, the kind of unit an emperor would rely on to hold the most volatile frontiers of the empire. This is what makes their eventual vanishing so profoundly unsettling. It wasn't a minor auxiliary unit that went missing. It was a legendary formation, a piece of Rome's very soul that stepped off the edge of the known world and into the silent embrace of myth. For decades, the Ninth called the wild, green island of Britain its home. After the initial invasion, the legion was stationed at a series of forts, but its most significant and lasting posting was at the fortress of Eboracum, a name that would one day evolve into the historic city of York. This was not a temporary camp, but a permanent stone fortress, a powerful statement of Roman intent built at the confluence of two rivers. Think of it as a small, self-sufficient town dedicated entirely to war, housing thousands of men within its formidable walls. The sight of Eboracum would have been awe-inspiring to the local Britons and a comforting bastion of familiarity to the soldiers themselves. Its high stone and turf ramparts, deep defensive ditches, and imposing wooden gates proclaimed an unshakable authority. Inside, the streets were laid out in a precise grid pattern, a little piece of Roman order transplanted onto the very edge of the known world. There were barracks blocks for the soldiers, stables for the cavalry horses, a headquarters building housing the legion's sacred standards and paid chests, workshops where blacksmiths, carpenters, and leatherworkers tirelessly maintained the machinery of the legion, and even a hospital to care for the sick and wounded. This fortress was the Ninth's anchor, the solid, unmoving center from which they projected Roman power across the entire north of the province. The life of a legionary stationed here was one of grueling routine, a world away from the glory of epic battles. His days were governed by the sound of the trumpet calls and the relentless demands of duty. A typical day would begin before dawn with a sparse breakfast, followed by hours of intense, repetitive weapons training. He would practice with his heavy javelin, the pilum, thrusting his short, stabbing sword, the gladius, into wooden posts, and relentlessly drill formations with his century, a unit of 80 men. Muscle memory was a matter of life and death. When not training for combat, he was a laborer, an engineer, and a builder. The Roman army was the greatest construction crew in the ancient world, and legionaries spent as much time with a pickaxe or a trowel as they did with a sword. They built the very roads they marched on, sturdy, straight highways of stone and gravel that cut through the British landscape, linking their forts and enabling the rapid movement of troops and supplies. They erected bridges, dug drainage ditches, and quarried stone. This constant work was not just about infrastructure, it was a deliberate way to maintain discipline, fitness, and morale, keeping thousands of highly trained men occupied and out of trouble during long periods of garrison life. Yet these men were not just faceless cogs in a military machine. They were individuals, many recruited from other provinces, for whom Britain was a strange, cold, and distant posting. A soldier from the sunny, vine-covered hills of Italy or the arid landscapes of North Africa must have found the damp, grey skies and thick forests of Britain profoundly alien. In his off-duty hours, a soldier might visit the bathhouse, the social heart of any Roman fort, to steam, sweat, and socialize. He might gamble with his comrades, write a letter home on a wax tablet, or make an offering at a small shrine to his favorite god. Perhaps Jupiter for victory, or Mithras, a soldier's god whose mysterious cult was incredibly popular among the legions. Just outside the fortress walls, a bustling civilian settlement, or canopy, would have sprung up, filled with traders, merchants, tavern keepers, and families, all there to service the economic engine of the legion. Over years, even decades, many soldiers formed local relationships, taking British women as wives or companions, their lives becoming slowly, inextricably woven into the fabric of the land they were sent to conquer. This established, deeply rooted presence at Eboracum makes the legion's ultimate fate all the more perplexing. They weren't strangers just passing through. They were a fundamental part of the local landscape for generations, which makes their sudden and total erasure from that very landscape a historical event of stunning finality. So, with their fortress at York as a solid foundation, the 9th Legion's duties would frequently take them far beyond its walls, northward into a land that remained stubbornly wild and unconquered. Beyond the frontier, the world changed. The rolling hills and forests gave way to a more brutal, broken terrain of mountains, deep glens, and vast, boggy peatlands. This was Caledonia, a name that evoked a sense of dread and mystery for the Romans. It was a place at the very edge of their maps, a land shrouded in mist and rumor, inhabited by tribes the Romans collectively, and somewhat fearfully referred to as the Picts, the painted people, for their fearsome practice of decorating their bodies with intricate blue tattoos made from woad. For the seasoned soldiers of the 9th, used to the relative order of the southern British province, campaigning in Caledonia was a descent into a different kind of warfare entirely. The first major push into this hostile territory came under the command of Quintus Petilius Cerealis, a man whose very career was a testament to the turbulent times. Cerealis had a history with the 9th. Decades earlier, as a young commander, he had narrowly escaped disaster when he led a detachment of the legion during the Great Boudiccan Revolt, managing to extricate his cavalry while the bulk of his infantry was wiped out. Now, as governor of Britain around the year 71, he was given a chance to redeem that earlier setback and expand Roman influence northward. His campaigns were aggressive and large-scale, intended to shock and awe the northern tribes into submission. The 9th Legion would have been at the very tip of this spear, marching along newly constructed roads, building temporary marching camps each night. Those distinct, playing card-shaped earthworks that still scar the Scottish landscape today, and engaging in sharp, brutal clashes with the Pictish warriors. The fighting was not the set-piece battles of old, but a grueling series of ambushes, skirmishes, and raids. The Picts knew their land intimately and used it as a weapon, melting into the misty glens only to reappear where they were least expected. For the legionaries, weighed down by 60 pounds of armor, pack, and weapons, every march through the sucking bogs and up the steep, heather-covered hillsides was a test of endurance. Cerealis's campaigns achieved a measure of success, establishing a new forward frontier and proving that Roman legions could operate, however uncomfortably, deep in the highlands. But it was a fragile hold bought with blood and constant vigilance. The next and most famous chapter in the Roman conquest of the north unfolded under Gnaeus Julius Agricola, who became governor in 78. Agricola was a career soldier and a brilliant strategist, and he understood that to truly pacify Caledonia, he needed to do more than just raid. He needed to break the will of the tribes completely. His campaigns were longer, more methodical, and far more ambitious. he pushed his forces, with the 9th undoubtedly playing a central role further north than any Roman army had ever gone before. We have a remarkably detailed account of this period from a very biased but vivid source, the writings of his son-in-law, the historian Tacitus. Through his narrative, we can picture the campaign's climax. Agricola fortified the newly seized lands with a chain of forts, and he supported his advance with a fleet of ships sailing along the coast, shadowing the army's progress. This was a pincer movement on a grand strategic scale, designed to cut off the Pictish tribes from their resources and avenues of escape. The culmination of years of campaigning came at a place Tacitus calls Mons Gropius, the Battle of the Gropian Mountain, fought around the year 83. On that day, the full might of the Roman war machine in Britain faced the assembled fury of the Caledonian tribes. Tacitus paints a dramatic picture, putting a rousing speech into the mouth of the Caledonian chieftain Calgacus, who famously declared that the Romans make a desert and call it peace. The battle itself was a testament to Roman discipline against native ferocity. The Picts, fighting from higher ground, launched a devastating downhill charge. But the Roman auxiliaries, non-citizen troops drawn from other provinces, bore the brunt of the initial assault, while the legions, including we must assume the 9th, were held in reserve as a solid, unbreakable backbone. The auxiliaries held the line, and after a fierce and bloody struggle, the Roman cavalry swept around the flanks and shattered the Pictish force. It was a crushing, definitive military victory for Rome. Tens of thousands of the enemy were said to have been slain for the loss of only a few hundred Romans. In the immediate aftermath, it must have seemed that the entire island was finally, after 40 years of effort, within Rome's grasp. The 9th Legion had helped achieve the empire's greatest military success in Britain. They stood triumphant on a bloody field, the misty north seemingly laid open before them. And yet, this moment of supreme victory, this pinnacle of their service in Britain, also marks the beginning of the final dark curtain falling upon their story. The glory of Mons Gropius was, in a tragic twist, the last clear, bright light we see them in before they march from the pages of history into the realm of enduring legend. But all glorious victories eventually fade into the past and the world moves on. In the years immediately following Mons Gropius, the strategic picture for Rome in Britain began to shift dramatically. Emperor Domitian, who had succeeded his brother Titus, faced mounting military crises along the Danube frontier in Central Europe. These wars demanded soldiers, and legions were a precious, finite resource. The hard-won territories in northern Britain, so costly to seize and so difficult to hold, began to seem like a luxury the empire could no longer afford. One by one, the forward forts built by Agricola were abandoned. The Roman frontier gradually retracted southward, consolidating along a more defensible line that would eventually be fortified as Hadrian's Wall. The 9th Legion, having reached the northernmost point of Roman expansion, was pulled back to its familiar stone fortress at Eboracum, and it is here, in the relative comfort and order of their long-time home, that the solid, tangible evidence for their existence begins to thin and then abruptly stops. The most telling pieces of evidence for the legion's presence are not grand historical accounts, but the everyday, utilitarian objects they left behind. Among the most reliable are roof tiles. The Roman army operated its own brick and tile works, and it was standard practice to stamp these products with the name of the legion that made them. These stamped tiles are like historical breadcrumbs, marking a legion's location and activity at a specific point in time. A significant number of tiles bearing the stamp of the 9th Legion, Leg Vii Hispana, have been found at Eboracum. This confirms without a doubt that the legion was present and active in the construction and maintenance of its fortress, but then the trail of these stamps simply ends. No such tiles have been found that can be reliably dated to a period after the first decade of the 2nd century, around the year 105 or 110. It's as if the brickworks just stopped production one day. Even more compelling than tiles are stone inscriptions. These were often set up to commemorate the completion of a building project, to honor an emperor, or to mark the career of a senior officer. One of the last certain pieces of evidence for the Ninth Legion's existence is an inscribed stone altar, or perhaps a building dedication, found in the northern English town of Nijmegen in the modern-day Netherlands. This inscription records the name of a centurion of the Ninth Legion. The critical detail is that this centurion is mentioned as having served in the Legion during a specific period, which historians have pinned down to the very end of the 1st century or the very beginning of the 2nd. After this, no further inscriptions from Britain or anywhere else in the Empire definitively name the Ninth Legion as an active military unit. The flow of epigraphic evidence, the hard proof carved in stone, dries up completely. Perhaps the most powerful evidence of all comes from what is missing. Around the year 122, the Emperor Hadrian visited Britain and ordered the construction of his famous wall to solidify the northern frontier. This was one of the largest construction projects ever undertaken in the Roman province, requiring the labor of thousands of soldiers from multiple legions. We know from inscriptions on the wall itself that the 3 other legions then stationed in Britain, the 2nd Augusta, the 6th Victrix, and the 20th Valeria Victrix, were all directly involved in its construction. Their names are proudly carved into dedication stones along the length of the wall, but the name of the 9th Legion, the Hispania, is conspicuously, profoundly absent. This silence is deafening. If the 9th had still been an active, functioning legion in Britain at the time, it is almost unthinkable that it would not have been assigned a section of the wall to build. Its absence from this monumental project strongly suggests that by the time the first foundation trench was dug, the 9th Legion was already gone from the army lists. The solid ground of fact gives way, and we are left standing at the edge of a historical void, looking into the mist and wondering what happened after that last certain tile was stamped, that final certain inscription was carved. So we are left with this profound administrative silence. The disappearance of the 9th Legion from the official records is not a single dramatic event recorded by a horrified historian. It is a slow fade, a gradual dimming of its light in the vast bureaucracy of the Roman Empire. Imagine the imperial archives in Rome, room after room of scrolls and wax tablets detailing troop deployments, pay records, and legionary strength reports. For over a century, the name Legio Vigii Hispana would have appeared on those documents with dependable regularity. Then, at some point in the early 2nd century, it simply ceased to be listed. The clerks who updated the master army rolls, the laticulum, would have stopped writing its name. It was no longer among the 28 or so legions that formed the backbone of the imperial military. This was not an oversight. The Roman military administration was meticulous, even obsessive about such details. A legion's existence was a matter of state security and financial accounting. Its disappearance from these lists means that, officially and for whatever reason, the Roman state itself no longer considered the 9th Legion to be a functional military entity. This administrative vanishing is perhaps the most compelling piece of the entire puzzle, because it speaks to a finality that is both chilling and absolute. We can look to a specific document, a glimpse into the imperial mindset from decades later, that solidifies this absence. Around the year 165, during the reign of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, a military scholar wrote a text known as the Institutia. This work was a practical guide for military commanders, and it included a list of all the legions in the Roman army at that time. The list names legions that were founded long after the 9th's heyday, and it also includes legions that were known to have been destroyed in battle and later reconstituted. But the 9th Legion, the Hispania, is not there. It is not listed among the active legions, nor is it mentioned as one that had been disbanded and reformed. It has been completely scrubbed from the official record, For an institution as historically conscious as the Roman army, this is a powerful statement. Legions that were annihilated, like the 3 legions of Varus in the Teutoburg forest, were never replaced out of a sense of shame and bad luck, but their memory was preserved, their names were remembered as a cautionary tale. The utter silence surrounding the 9th suggests a different kind of fate, one that was either so ignominious or so complete that the empire chose not to speak of it again, to let its name fade into obscurity as if it had never existed at all. This bureaucratic erasure forces us to confront the stark possibilities. The Roman army did not simply lose track of 5,000 men and all their equipment. The disappearance of a legion was a catastrophic financial and military loss, a blow to imperial prestige that would have required an official explanation. The silence, therefore, is not an accident, it is the result of a deliberate decision. It tells us that the high command in Rome knew what had happened to the 9th, and that knowledge was so damaging or so final that they saw no benefit in keeping its name on the rolls. This opens the door to the 2 most prominent and haunting theories. The first is a theory of catastrophic, violent destruction. The legion was wiped out, its eagles captured, its men left unburied on some forgotten northern battlefield. Such a defeat would have been a profound humiliation, something an emperor would want to quietly bury in the archives to avoid encouraging other enemies. The second theory is one of gradual administrative death, that the legion was so severely mauled in repeated, smaller conflicts that its remaining manpower was absorbed into other units, its identity dissolved and its number retired. Yet even this slower end would have been a significant event worthy of note. The complete lack of such a note, the void where its history should be, is what has allowed the legend to grow so powerfully for 2,000 years, transforming a military unit into an eternal ghost marching through the pages of history. The most dramatic and enduring theory, the one that has truly captured the public imagination for centuries, is that the 9th Legion met a sudden, violent, and total end somewhere in the treacherous landscapes of northern Britain. This is the stuff of legend, a tale of heroic last stands, ambushes in the mist, and an entire fighting force erased from existence in a single, catastrophic engagement. The appeal of this narrative is primal. It provides a clean, albeit horrifying, answer to the mystery. It suggests a definitive event, a moment in time when the legion's long and proud history was brutally severed. The very silence of the historical record in this interpretation is not an absence of evidence, but the stunned, horrified silence that follows a disaster of such magnitude that no one survived to tell the tale, and those in power chose not to speak of it again. To understand how this could happen, we must look to the volatile situation in the province of Britannia itself in the early 2nd century. The Roman hold on the north was always tenuous, a thin veneer of control stretched over a deeply resentful and frequently rebellious population. The most significant threat came from the Brigantes, a massive tribal confederation that controlled a huge swath of northern England. For decades, the Romans had maintained a fragile alliance with the Brigantian queen, Cartimandua, using her as a client ruler to keep the peace. But this arrangement collapsed in the late 1st century, leading to open warfare. The Romans intervened directly, and the 9th Legion would have been at the forefront of the brutal campaigns to subdue the Brigantes, fighting in a harsh, rolling landscape of hills and moors that was perfect for guerrilla warfare. While the tribe was eventually pacified, the embers of resentment never fully died out. It is entirely plausible that a major rebellion flared up again in the early 100s, one so severe that it caught the Roman authorities completely by surprise. A legion marching out to suppress such an uprising could have been drawn into a carefully laid trap, ambushed and overwhelmed by a force that knew the land intimately and fought with the fury of a people reclaiming their freedom. But the more popular setting for this final tragedy lies even further north beyond the last Roman forts, in the brooding wilderness of Caledonia. This was the domain of the Picts, the painted people, who had been defeated but never truly conquered at Mons Gropius. Decades after Agricola's victory, their strength would have regenerated, their anger at the Roman presence simmering. A new, charismatic war leader could have united the disparate tribes, forging them into a single, powerful army far larger and better organized than any the Romans had previously encountered. The theory goes that the 9th Legion, perhaps the nearest large force, was dispatched from Eboracum on a punitive expedition to crush this new coalition. They would have marched north along the military roads, confident in their discipline and power, only to be lured deep into a landscape that became their tomb. Imagine them entering a narrow glen with steep, wooded slopes on either side and a boggy floor that slowed their progress to a crawl. The air would have been still and quiet, the only sound the clanking of their gear and the crunch of their boots on the gravel. Then a single echoing war cry would have broken the silence, followed by a rain of spears and sling stones from the hidden heights above. The Picts would have rolled boulders down the slopes to break their formations, then swarmed down upon them, negating the Roman advantages of discipline and heavy armor in a chaotic, close-quarters massacre. In such a scenario, the legion's structure would have shattered. Centuries would have been isolated and destroyed one by one. The cavalry, if any escaped, would have ridden hard for the south, carrying fragmented, horrific reports of the disaster. The bulk of the 5,000 men, along with their commander, their paid chests, and most importantly, their sacred eagle standards, would have been left on the field, their bodies never recovered, their final fate known only to their victors. This theory of annihilation is powerfully supported by the precedent of other, well-documented Roman military disasters. The ghost of the Teutoburg forest, where 3 entire legions under Publius Quinctilius Varus were annihilated by Germanic tribes in 9 AD, would have haunted the Roman military mind for centuries. That was a catastrophe so profound that the Emperor Augustus was said to have wandered his palace, crying out, "Varus, give me back my legions." The Romans were perfectly capable of suffering devastating defeats, especially when led into overconfidence by an enemy they underestimated. The loss of a single legion, while still a massive blow, would have been more containable, both militarily and in terms of imperial propaganda. A governor or emperor, wary of appearing weak and encouraging further rebellions across the empire, might have made a conscious decision to cover up the scale of the disaster. The legion's name could have been quietly retired from the army lists, its fort at Eboracum handed over to a new unit, and its veterans and recruits already elsewhere quietly reassigned. The official line would have been one of strategic reorganization, while the grim truth was buried along with the fallen in some forgotten Scottish glen. The absence of the 9th from the building inscriptions on Hadrian's Wall, then, is not a mystery but a confirmation. They weren't there to build it because by the time it was conceived, they were already just a memory, a cautionary tale whispered by the soldiers who now guarded a new, more defensible frontier, a wall built in part because of the terrible price paid by the legion that was lost. While the theory of a final, cataclysmic battle in the highlands of Caledonia is a compelling one, there is another, earlier conflict that some have pointed to as the possible beginning of the end for the 9th. This theory takes us back several decades before their disappearance to one of the most brutal and traumatic episodes in the entire history of Roman Britain, the Great Revolt of Queen Boudicca. The chronological gap is significant, but the argument suggests that the legion never truly recovered from the near-fatal wound it suffered during that uprising, planting a seed of weakness that would ultimately lead to its dissolution years later. To understand this, we must travel back to the year 60 AD, a time when the 9th was stationed not at York, but at a forward base called Lindum, modern-day Lincoln. The situation in the province was explosive. The Roman governor, Suetonius Paulinus, was campaigning on the island of Anglesey, far to the west, aiming to destroy the Druidic stronghold there. This left the rest of the province dangerously exposed. The trigger for the revolt was the brutal annexation of the Iceni kingdom following the death of its client king, Prasutagus. Roman officials, in a shocking display of arrogance and cruelty, publicly flogged his widow, Boudicca, and raped her daughters. This act of profound disrespect and violence ignited a firestorm. Boudicca, a queen wronged, became the avenging heart of a massive coalition of Britons from the Iceni and Trinovantes tribes, all burning with a desire to drive the Romans into the sea. It is at this moment of supreme crisis that we get our clearest, most dramatic glimpse of the 9th Legion in action from the historical record, courtesy of the Roman historian Tacitus. The acting commander at the legion's base was a man named Quintus Petilius Cerealis, who would ironically later return as governor. Seeing the province collapsing into chaos and hearing of the Roman civilian population being massacred, Cerealis made a fateful decision. He would march the 9th Legion south to confront Boudicca's swelling army and relieve the besieged city of Camulogenum, modern Colchester. It was a bold, aggressive move, entirely in keeping with Roman military doctrine. But it was also a disastrous one. The legion, marching with confidence, was ambushed. We don't know the exact location, but the result was a crushing defeat. Boudicca's forces, vastly superior in number and fueled by a righteous fury, fell upon the Roman column. The infantry, the heart of the legion, was surrounded and cut to pieces. Tacitus states that nearly the entire infantry contingent was annihilated. Cerealis, showing a pragmatism that would save his own career if not his men, managed to escape with his cavalry, retreating back to the relative safety of his fortified camp. For the 9th Legion, this was not just a defeat, it was an evisceration. A legion's strength was its heavily armed infantry, the men who formed the unbreakable battle line. To lose almost all of them in a single engagement was a catastrophic blow from which few military units could ever fully recover. So, could this devastating mauling have been the prologue to the legion's ultimate disappearance 40 or 50 years later? Proponents of this theory argue that while the legion was officially rebuilt, its spirit was broken and its structural integrity permanently compromised. Replacing over 4,000 highly trained veteran legionaries was not a simple matter of drafting new recruits. The complex web of experience, camaraderie, and institutional knowledge that made a legion an effective fighting force was torn apart on that bloody field. The new recruits sent to fill the gaps would have been green, less disciplined, and lacking the deep bond of the men they replaced. The legion's reputation, once formidable, would have been tarnished. They were now the legion that had been nearly wiped out by a rebel army. In the intensely proud and competitive world of the Roman legions, such a stigma could linger for generations, affecting morale and perhaps even the quality of officers assigned to lead them. The theory continues that this weakened 9th Legion was then posted to the volatile northern frontier, where it faced decades of relentless, low-intensity warfare against the Brigantes and the Picts. In this harsh environment, it would have been constantly engaged, suffering a steady trickle of casualties in skirmishes and ambushes. Unlike a healthy legion that could easily absorb such losses and replenish its ranks, the already depleted 9th might have found it increasingly difficult to maintain its strength. Its recruitment numbers may have fallen short, its veterans may have been transferred to bolster other units, and over time it could have simply withered on the vine, becoming a hollow shell of its former self. Eventually, the imperial administration in Rome, reviewing its military assets, may have made the cold, calculating decision that the legion was no longer combat effective. Its remaining soldiers could have been dispersed to other legions, its number retired, and its proud name quietly removed from the rolls. In this scenario, there was no single dramatic final battle, but a long, slow fade into nothingness, a direct consequence of a wound inflicted half a century earlier by Boudicca's vengeful hordes. However, this theory, while narratively satisfying in connecting two great British tragedies, faces significant historical hurdles. The most powerful counter-argument is the simple passage of time. The Boudiccan revolt occurred around 60 AD. We have solid evidence that the 9th Legion was not only reconstituted, but was active and functioning at a high level for decades afterward. It played a central role in the campaigns of Cerealis and Agricola, including the great victory at Mons Gropius in 83 AD. A legion that was a hollow, weakened shell could not have performed the demanding offensive operations required to push Rome's frontier to its farthest northern extent. The Roman army was nothing if not ruthlessly professional. It would not have entrusted a key role in such a major conquest to a unit it considered broken. The gap between the Boudiccan defeat and the legion's disappearance around 120 AD is simply too long. It stretches credulity to think a mortally wounded legion could have survived and fought effectively for another 60 years. The evidence suggests that the Ninth did, in fact, recover its strength and its honor, only to face a different, later calamity that finally erased it from history. The Boudica connection offers a poignant beginning to a tragedy, but the final act of the Ninth story likely unfolded under a different emperor in a different war on a different misty field. Yet another theory offers a completely different fate for the Ninth, one that removes them from the mists of Britain entirely and sends them on a long journey to die in a different corner of the empire. This is the Eastern transfer hypothesis, which suggests the legion was not annihilated at all, but was simply relocated to meet a more pressing military crisis, and its eventual disbandment was a quiet, administrative affair far from the shores of Britain. This idea challenges the romantic notion of a heroic last stand, proposing instead a bureaucratic solution to the mystery, grounded in the pragmatic, often ruthless troop movements of the Roman military machine. The logic for this transfer centers on the major wars that were erupting during the reign of Emperor Trajan in the early 2nd century. While Britain was a troublesome frontier, it was often seen as a strategic backwater compared to the rich, volatile provinces in the east. Trajan was an emperor obsessed with military glory and expansion, and he launched two massive, back-to-back campaigns against the powerful Parthian Empire, Rome's great rival in the east. These wars, fought in the deserts and mountains of Mesopotamia, required a huge concentration of legions. Historical records show that Trajan drafted units from all over the empire to fill his invasion force, pulling legions from the relatively quiet German and Danube frontiers. This created a domino effect. To replace those transferred legions, units from quieter provinces like Britain might have been ordered east. The Ninth, as a veteran legion, would have been a prime candidate for such a reassignment. They were pulled from York not to march to their doom in a Caledonian glen, but to embark on ships sailing down the coast of Gaul and then marching overland to the Danube, eventually heading toward the glittering, ancient cities of the east. There is a fascinating, albeit hotly debated, piece of evidence that seems to support this idea. A fragmentary, damaged inscription was found in the ancient city of Noviomagus, which is modern-day Nijmegen in the Netherlands. This was a major Roman military base on the Rhine frontier. The inscription appears to list units of the Roman army, and some scholars have argued that among the legions named is the Legio Viae Hispana. If this reading is correct, and if the inscription can be dated to the right period around the year 120, it would be a bombshell discovery. It would place the Ninth Legion alive and well on the European continent after the time it was supposed to have vanished in Britain. The theory then suggests that the Ninth was only temporarily stationed at Nijmegen, part of a strategic shuffle of troops on their long journey to the Parthian front. This would explain why their tile stamps disappear from York. They were no longer there. Their fortress was handed over to a newly arrived legion, the 6th Victrix, whose presence in Britain is well attested from this period onward. The absence of the 9th from Hadrian's Wall is no longer a mystery of death, but simply one of relocation. They were busy building fortifications on a different frontier, thousands of miles away. But what then? If the 9th made it to the east, how did it ultimately meet its end? The trail, even here, grows cold and speculative. Trajan's Parthian War was a colossal undertaking, involving some of the largest armies Rome had ever fielded. It was also a campaign of extreme hardship, featuring long marches, brutal sieges, and fierce battles in a harsh climate. The legion could have been shattered in one of these major engagements. Alternatively, and perhaps more likely, is its potential fate in the years that followed. After Trajan's death, his successor, Hadrian, faced a series of massive Jewish revolts, particularly the bloody Bar Kokhba revolt in Judea, which raged from 132 to 136. This conflict was infamous for its ferocity and the staggering casualties suffered by the Roman army. Some historians have proposed that the Ninth was part of the force sent to crush this rebellion and was so decimated in the relentless guerrilla-style fighting that it was deemed no longer viable as an independent unit. The remnants of its manpower would have been absorbed into other legions, and its number, associated now with a painful and costly campaign, was permanently retired. This kind of gradual dissolution through catastrophic attrition would also explain its disappearance from the army lists without the fanfare of a single recorded disaster. The appeal of the Eastern transfer theory is its grounding in the cold, hard realities of imperial logistics. It replaces a dramatic, cinematic end with a more plausible, if less thrilling, administrative process. It accounts for the silence in Britain without requiring a cover-up of a massive military defeat. The Roman bureaucracy was far more likely to quietly retire a legion drained by years of hard fighting in a distant war than it was to hide the loss of a legion to northern barbarians. However, this theory is not without its own serious weaknesses. The Nijmegen inscription is fragmentary and its interpretation is contested. Many epigraphers are not convinced it refers to the Ninth at all. Furthermore, if the Ninth was active in Trajan's Parthian wars or Hadrian's Jewish revolts, it is strange that no clearer record of its participation survives. These were well-documented conflicts, and the movement of legions was carefully tracked. The complete absence of the Ninth's name from the rosters of legions known to have fought in these wars is a significant mark against the theory. It proposes a journey from one silence to another, leaving us to wonder if the legion simply evaporated somewhere on the long road between York and the deserts of Mesopotamia, its fate in the east just as unknown as its fate in the north. Yet this single piece of evidence, the Nijmegen inscription, is far from a clear-cut solution. It is more of a tantalizing, fragmented whisper from the past that has sparked as much debate as it has provided answers. The artifact in question is a broken roof tile, stamped with what some epigraphers have interpreted as the mark of the Ninth Legion. It was discovered not in Britain, but at the site of a Roman fortress on the Rhine frontier in the modern-day Netherlands. On the surface, this seems to offer concrete proof that the legion was not annihilated in Britain, but was indeed transferred to the continent, just as the Eastern transfer theory suggests. A roof tile, after all, is not a portable object like a coin that could be carried by a traveling soldier. Its presence indicates the legion was stationed there, building and maintaining its barracks and headquarters. If this stamp is genuine and dates to the early 2nd century, it would completely rewrite the final chapter of the Ninth story, pulling them back from the brink of a Caledonian massacre and placing them squarely on the well-trodden paths of the Roman military logistics network. However, the world of archaeology rarely offers such neat and tidy answers. The problem with the Nijmegen tile lies in the agonizing details. The stamp itself is incomplete and damaged, its letters partially missing or worn away. The reading of leg VAIH or similar is an interpretation, a scholarly reconstruction based on the fragments that remain. Other experts have looked at the same markings and suggested it could just as easily be the stamp of a different legion, such as the 6th, whose presence in the region is well documented. This is not a matter of one side being right and the other wrong. It is a fundamental challenge of interpreting damaged evidence. Without a perfectly clear, unambiguous stamp, the tile remains in a state of archaeological limbo, a compelling maybe but not a definitive yes. It's a ghost of a possibility, a shadow on a piece of baked clay that teases us with a solution we cannot fully grasp. Furthermore, even if we accept the stamp as genuine proof of the ninth's presence at Nijmegen, it immediately raises a host of new and equally puzzling questions. When exactly was the Legion there? The dating of such tiles is notoriously difficult. It could place them at the site around the year 105, or it could be from a decade or two later. This timeline is crucial. If it's from the earlier period, it could support the idea that the ninth was pulled from Britain to reinforce Trajan's Dacian Wars, a massive conflict in modern-day Romania that demanded huge numbers of troops. They would have been one piece in a vast imperial puzzle, moved from a troublesome province to a critical war zone. But if the tile is from a later period, say around 120, it would suggest the Legion survived longer than the British evidence implies, perhaps even being transferred out just before or during the early days of Hadrian's reign. This later date would make their absence from the building of Hadrian's Wall perfectly logical, but it would also mean their ultimate fate must be sought not in a British glen, but somewhere along the Danube or in the deserts of the east. The journey itself, if it happened, would have been a massive undertaking. We must envision the entire legion, thousands of men, breaking camp at Eboracum for the last time. They would have packed their standards, their paid chests, their artillery, and all their personal belongings. They would have marched south, down the long, straight Roman roads to the legionary port at Rutupii, modern Richborough in Kent. There, a fleet of transport ships would have been assembled to carry them across the channel to the continent. Once in Gaul, they would have begun the long overland march, following the river networks and military roads that led to the Rhine frontier. Their stop at Nijmegen might have been temporary, a winter quarters or a staging post while awaiting further orders for the long march east. The very fact that they left behind something as mundane as a stamped tile is, in a way, the most human part of this entire mystery. It was a routine piece of administrative work, a clerk ensuring the Legion received credit for the tiles its own brickworks had produced. This mundane act, this bureaucratic fingerprint, is what survived, while the ultimate fate of the men who made it did not. So, where does this leave us? The Nijmegen evidence acts as a powerful counterweight to the popular annihilation theory, reminding us that the Roman Empire was a dynamic, interconnected system. Legions were moved, reassigned, and redeployed as imperial needs changed. The silence in Britain does not automatically mean a grave in Scotland. It could just mean a transfer order. Yet, the ambiguous nature of the tile stamp prevents it from being the definitive clue that solves the mystery. It opens a door to a different narrative, one of long marches and imperial grand strategy, but it doesn't allow us to see what lay at the end of that road. The Legion may have left Britain alive, but its story does not have a happy ending. Whether it was slowly bled white in Trajan's Dacian Wars, shattered in the brutal street fighting of the Bar Kokhba revolt, or simply dissolved after years of relentless campaigning, the final result was the same. The Nijmegen tile is a flicker of light in the darkness, a brief confirmation that the Ninth Legion was once elsewhere, but the darkness ultimately closes in around it once more, leaving its final destination as mysterious as ever. This brings us to the third and perhaps most historically grounded theory, one that shifts the scene of the tragedy from the misty highlands of Scotland to the sun-baked, mountainous kingdoms of the Near East. This hypothesis is anchored not in archaeological whispers like a stamped tile, but in a single, cryptic line from a respected Roman historian, Cassius Dio, writing decades after the events he describes. In his vast history of Rome, while recounting the early years of the reign of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, Dio mentions a major military catastrophe that occurred in the Roman province of Armenia around the year 161. He states with devastating brevity that an entire legion under its commander, a legate, was annihilated by the Parthians. Cassius Dio does not name the legion. It is this chilling, anonymous report of a complete destruction that has led many scholars to point a finger directly at the missing ninth. To understand why this particular disaster fits so well, we need to look at the broader political context. The year 161 marked a major turning point. The philosopher Emperor Marcus Aurelius had just ascended to the throne, and almost immediately, the empire's eastern rival, the powerful Parthian Empire, saw an opportunity to test the new, untested ruler. The king of Parthia, Vologases Roman IV, launched a massive invasion, sweeping into the Roman client kingdom of Armenia, deposing its pro-Roman ruler and installing his own candidate. This was a direct and brazen challenge to Roman authority, one that could not go unanswered. The governor of the nearby province of Cappadocia, a man named Severianus, marched hastily to meet the threat with what forces he had available. According to the historical accounts, which include the writings of Lucian, Severianus was an overconfident and incompetent leader, easily lured into a trap by the Parthian general. His army, which Cassius Dio strongly implies was a full legion, was surrounded at the city of Elageia and systematically destroyed. Severianus, realizing the hopelessness of the situation, took his own life after only 2 days of fighting. The defeat was total and humiliating, so why would this ill-fated legion be the 9th Hispania? The reasoning is both chronological and logistical. By the time of Marcus Aurelius, the Roman army list was well documented. We know the identities and locations of almost all the 28 legions active during this period. When historians cross-reference these lists with the known legions stationed in the east at the time of the Armenian disaster, they find that nearly every unit is accounted for elsewhere. There is, in essence, a legion-shaped hole in the historical record for this specific campaign. The 9th, already absent from the rolls for decades, is the prime candidate to fill that hole. The theory posits that the legion was indeed transferred east decades earlier, perhaps during the Trajanic Wars, and had remained stationed in the eastern provinces, its identity slowly fading from the records of the Western historians who were the primary sources for Britain's history. It was, in this scenario, a legion in the wrong place at the worst possible time, commanded by a fool and sacrificed to the ambitions of a Parthian king. The geography of the catastrophe adds to its plausibility. Armenia is a land of rugged, high-altitude plateaus and deep valleys, a terrain as difficult and unforgiving as the Scottish highlands, but on a vaster scale. A Roman legion, trained for set-piece battles, would have been incredibly vulnerable in such an environment against a highly mobile Parthian army famous for its horse archers and heavily armored cataphract cavalry. The Parthian tactic was not to meet the Roman infantry head-on, but to encircle them, shower them with arrows from a distance, and wear them down through attrition. The annihilation at Elageia would not have been a single, heroic close-quarters struggle, but a slow, grinding, and demoralizing extermination. The legion would have formed its testudo, its tortoise formation, to deflect the endless hail of arrows, but without the ability to close with the enemy or break the encirclement, their fate was sealed. They were picked apart where they stood, their discipline rendered useless against an enemy that refused to engage in the way they had been trained for. The loss of their eagle standard in such a defeat would have been a certainty, a final symbol of their utter erasure. The appeal of the Armenian theory is its powerful alignment with the known mechanisms of Roman history. It provides a specific name, a specific date, and a specific context for the legion's destruction, all from a credible historical source. There was no need for a cover-up. The disaster was a matter of public record, a black mark on the start of Marcus Aurelius's reign, but one that was later overshadowed by his long and famous wars against the Germanic tribes along the Danube. The 9th simply faded from memory because it was destroyed in a theater of war that was, for most Romans, distant and less politically charged than a disaster on a European frontier. Its name was retired, as was the custom with legions lost in battle, and the bureaucratic machine moved on. This theory offers a clean, historical, and tragically mundane end to the legend. Not a romantic disappearance into the Celtic mists, but a brutal, documented extermination in the harsh mountains of Armenia, a forgotten casualty in the endless, grinding conflict between two great empires. It is an end that lacks the poetry of the British theories, but it carries the heavy weight of historical probability. To comprehend the shadow that fell over the Ninth Legion, we must first understand the man who commanded them at their historical zenith, the figure who provides our most vivid yet frustratingly silent account of their final years in the light. That man was Gnaeus Julius Agricola, a career soldier and provincial governor whose name is forever linked with the Roman conquest of Britain. His story comes to us not through dry official dispatches, but through a deeply personal and partisan biography written by his son-in-law, the great historian Tacitus. This relationship is the key to both the value and the limitations of our knowledge. Tacitus's Agricola is less a dispassionate historical record and more a eulogy and a political tract, crafted to glorify his father-in-law's achievements and by extension to criticize the emperors who followed, whom Tacitus viewed with suspicion and disdain. It is through this polished lens of familial pride that we see the Ninth Legion one last time in clear detail, marching not toward oblivion but toward its greatest victory. Agricola's governorship from around 77 to 84 AD represented the most aggressive and expansive phase of Roman rule in Britain. He was a man of immense energy and strategic vision, and he understood that pacifying the island required more than just punitive raids. It demanded a comprehensive program of subjugation and assimilation. His strategy was multi-pronged. He launched a series of relentless summer campaigns, pushing ever further north into the uncharted wilds of Caledonia. But he also understood the power of Romanization. He encouraged the building of Roman-style forums, temples, and baths among the conquered British elite, and he made a point of educating the sons of chieftains in the Latin language and Roman arts. He was, in effect, waging a culture war alongside his military one, believing that men who embraced Roman luxuries and learning would be less likely to take up arms against Rome. The legions were the engine of this entire endeavor, and the Ninth, as one of the 4 legions in Britain, would have been constantly engaged both as a fighting force and as a construction corps, building the roads and forts that made this expansion possible. It is in the account of his later campaigns that Tacitus gives us our last certain glimpse of the Ninth Legion as an active, integral part of the Roman army. The narrative builds toward its climax, the great battle against the massed tribes of Caledonia at Mons Graupius. Tacitus sets the scene with a dramatist's flair. He describes the British forces under the leadership of the chieftain Calgacus occupying the high ground, their line seeming to stretch on forever, their chariots causing a thunderous din as they maneuvered across the slopes. On the plain below, Agricola deployed his army, and here Tacitus makes a critical distinction. He states that Agricola, confident in the valor of his auxiliaries and wanting to spare the blood of the Roman citizens who made up the legions, placed his 4 legions at the head of the battle, but drawn up in front of the ramparts of his camp as a solid reserve and a psychological bulwark. The actual fighting was done by the auxiliaries, thousands of non-citizen troops who advanced uphill to engage the enemy in a fierce and bloody struggle. The battle was ultimately a masterpiece of tactics, decided by a flanking maneuver of Roman cavalry that broke the Caledonian line and turned their resolve into a rout. For the men of the Ninth, standing in their gleaming armor before the ramparts, this must have been a moment of immense pride and frustration in equal measure. They were the ultimate guarantee of victory, the unbreakable spine of the army, yet they were denied the glory of direct combat. Their discipline held the line while others reaped the honors. Tacitus's account of the battle is triumphant, a fitting capstone to Agricola's career. He reports that 10,000 of the enemy were slain for the loss of only 360 Romans. In the aftermath, Agricola accepted the surrender of various tribes and even sent his fleet on a circumnavigation of the northern coast, confirming that Britain was indeed an island. The message was clear. Under Agricola's command, Rome had reached its absolute limit in Britain, and the 9th Legion had been a cornerstone of that achievement. This is the last time Tacitus mentions the legion by name. They are present, they are victorious, they are a key part of the most celebrated military success in the history of Roman Britain. And then, in the pages of history, they begin to fade. The silence that follows in Tacitus's narrative is perhaps the most telling element of all. His biography ends with Agricola's recall to Rome by the suspicious Emperor Domitian, his subsequent retirement from public life, and his death. There is no epilogue that follows the fate of the legions he once commanded. This is our first great loss. If the 9th had been annihilated in some terrible disaster during or immediately after Agricola's tenure, it is almost inconceivable that Tacitus, who sought every opportunity to highlight Domitian's failings, would have omitted such a catastrophic event. A major military defeat on the scale of a lost legion would have been the perfect weapon to bludgeon the emperor's reputation, proof of his negligence and the decline that set in after the great Agricola was gone. The fact that Tacitus does not mention such a disaster is a powerful argument that the 9th did not meet its end during the Agricolan period. They survived the great campaign and returned to their fortress at Eboracum. This creates a puzzling chronological gap. The legion was clearly intact and functional around 83 or 84 AD. Yet within 40 years, by the time Hadrian's Wall was being built, it was gone. So what happened in those intervening decades? This is where the limitations of Tacitus become so frustrating. His focus was exclusively on his father-in-law. Once Agricola left Britain, the chronicle of its legions effectively ends for us. We are left with only fragments and silence for the reigns of Domitian, Nerva, and Trajan, precisely the period when the 9th most likely met its fate. The answer must lie in the unrecorded history of those years, in the constant grinding warfare that defined the northern frontier even after the peak of expansion had passed. The victory at Mons Graupius did not bring permanent peace. It merely pushed the most hostile tribes further into their mountain fastnesses, from where they would continue to harry the Roman occupiers. The 9th Legion, stationed at the northernmost major fortress, would have been the first line of defense, bearing the brunt of countless raids, skirmishes, and perhaps even larger unrecorded uprisings. It is in this shadowy period of relentless attrition, far from the glittering prose of a senatorial historian, that the true beginning of the end for the 9th Legion may have quietly commenced. Yet for a mystery to truly capture the human spirit, it must transcend the dry pages of history and archaeology and take root in the fertile ground of myth and folklore. The disappearance of the 9th Legion did not fade with time. Instead, it grew, transforming over centuries from a historical puzzle into a potent national legend, its story woven into the very fabric of British cultural identity. This process began remarkably early, finding its first great amplifier not in a poet but in a monk. Around the year 1200, the Welsh cleric Geoffrey of Muntham was composing his Historia Regum Britanniae, or History of the Kings of Britain, a work that would become a medieval bestseller and one of the most influential books ever written. It was a dazzling and largely fictional chronicle that purported to tell the grand story of Britain from its mythical founding by the Trojan exile Brutus all the way to the Anglo-Saxon conquest. And it is within these pages that we find the first literary fusion of a lost Roman force with the most enduring hero of British myth, King Arthur. Geoffrey's narrative is a tapestry of legend, but his account of the legion's end is strikingly specific and dramatic. He tells of a Roman consul named Lucius sent to Britain to demand tribute from the legendary King Arthur. In response, Arthur gathers his knights and marches to meet the Roman threat in Gaul. But before he leaves, he places his nephew Mordred in charge of the kingdom. Geoffrey then delivers his crucial, fateful line. To aid Mordred in this task, Arthur leaves behind the legion which he had brought with him from the island of Britain. He specifically calls this unit the 5th Legion, but in the tangled web of medieval chronicles, legion numbers were often confused or used symbolically. Many scholars see this as a clear, if garbled, reference to the 9th. In Geoffrey's telling, this legion does not vanish in the north, it is destroyed in betrayal. While Arthur is campaigning triumphantly on the continent, the treacherous Mordred usurps the throne and weds Arthur's queen, Guinevere. The legion left behind, loyal to Arthur, is subsequently wiped out by Mordred's forces in the civil war that follows. Here, the historical loss is repurposed, becoming a key tragic element in the grand saga of Arthur's fall. A noble force massacred not by barbarians, but by the treachery of a Briton. This connection to the Arthurian cycle gave the legend a powerful new lease on life. Arthur was the once and future king, the symbol of British resistance against invading Saxons, and later a figure of chivalric romance. By tying the 9th Legion to his story, Geoffrey of Montham elevated its disappearance from a military incident to an event of mythic importance. It was no longer just a Roman legion that was lost. It was a legion that had fought for the greatest British hero, its fate intertwined with the fall of a golden age. This version of events was repeated and embellished by countless poets and chroniclers who followed Geoffrey, cementing the idea of a lost, loyal Roman-British force in the popular imagination for centuries. The legion's historical identity began to blur, its Roman essence slowly replaced by a romanticized role in the native Celtic resistance, a strange and poignant transformation for a unit that had spent its life conquering and pacifying those very same people. Beyond the grand chronicles, the legend also seeped into the local soil, giving rise to place lore and folk tales, particularly in the north of England around its old home of York. One persistent and evocative piece of folklore claims that on certain foggy nights, particularly along the old Roman road leading north from the city, you can still hear the phantom march of the legion. The story goes that if you stand quietly in the mist near a particular stretch of road, you might catch the sound of thousands of muffled footsteps, the faint jingle of harness, and the low, rhythmic beat of a drum, the ghostly 9th, forever marching to their unknown doom. This kind of spectral legend is a common folkloric motif, a way for a landscape to remember a profound, unresolved trauma. The land itself becomes a recorder of the past, replaying the final, fateful march of the men who once garrisoned it. It is a story that needs no historian. It is felt in the chill of the air and heard in the imagination, a direct, emotional connection to the mystery that no archaeological report could ever provide. Another fascinating local tradition emerged in the village of Rochester in Kent. Here, the legend took a different, more haunted form. Local lore spoke of a tunnel, sometimes called the Roman Tunnel, from which a ghostly, headless soldier would occasionally emerge. The story often linked this apparition directly to the lost 9th, a lone, spectral survivor condemned to forever wander, separated from his comrades. This motif of the headless ghost is also deeply rooted in folklore, often signifying a spirit that cannot find peace, perhaps because its body was desecrated or never properly buried. In this version, the entire tragedy of the Legion is distilled into a single, recurring image of loss and unrest, a powerful symbol for a community trying to make sense of a vast, impersonal historical event by giving it a local, tangible, and terrifying face. The romantic appeal of the legend reached its zenith in the modern era, particularly with the rise of historical fiction in the 20th century. The most famous example is Rosemary Sutcliffe's beloved 1954 novel, The Eagle of the Ninth, which has done more than any other work to shape the modern public's understanding of the mystery. Sutcliffe masterfully wove the historical fragments into a compelling personal quest. Her story follows a young Roman officer, Marcus Flavius Aquila, the son of the ninth commander, who travels north of Hadrian's Wall into the wilds of Caledonia to discover the truth about his father's legion and recover its lost eagle standard. In her narrative, the legion was indeed destroyed in a great uprising, and its eagle was captured by the tribes, becoming a sacred totem. Sutcliffe's genius was in humanizing the mystery, focusing on the personal cost of loss, the clash of cultures, and the possibility of reconciliation. Her book and the films and television series it inspired cemented the image of the ninth marching into the Scottish mists to be annihilated, and of the eagle as the physical embodiment of its lost honor. It is a testament to the power of story that for many people today, Sutcliffe's fictional version is the history, proving that a well-told legend can often be more enduring and emotionally resonant than the fragmented, ambiguous truth. This journey from historical silence to romantic legend reveals something fundamental about our relationship with the past. A clean, bureaucratic explanation that the legion was transferred and gradually disbanded in the East satisfies the historian's desire for order and probability. But it leaves the human spirit cold, the story of an entire community of men, a small world in itself, being utterly erased in a single, catastrophic event touches something deeper within us. It speaks to our fear of the unknown, our fascination with tragedy, and our longing for stories of heroism and last stands. The mists of Caledonia provide a perfect, atmospheric backdrop for an epic ending, far more poetic than a slow dissolution in a dusty Mesopotamian garrison. The legend gives the 5,000 men of the ninth a collective, dramatic fate, a proper ending to their long story, even if that ending is one of horror. It allows them to remain forever suspended in that moment of marching into the unknown, forever brave, forever united, forever lost. They are no longer just a line on a missing military roster. They have become eternal archetypes, the ghosts on the road, the loyal legion betrayed, the heroes of a 1,000-year-old story we are still telling today, ensuring that in the realm of myth, the Ninth Legion will never truly be gone. The story of the Ninth Legion was perfectly poised for a modern renaissance, finding its way from academic journals and dusty folklore into the vibrant, image-saturated world of popular culture. It was the historical novelist Rosemary Sutcliffe who, in 1954, performed the most significant act of alchemy, transforming the skeletal historical facts into a living, breathing, and deeply human story with her classic novel, The Eagle of the Ninth. Sutcliffe didn't just write about the legion's disappearance, she gave it a face, a heart, and a quest. Her protagonist, the young Roman officer Marcus Flavius Aquila, is driven by a very personal mission: to discover the fate of his father, the commander of the lost Ninth, and to recover the legion's sacred eagle standard, the embodiment of its honor and soul. This brilliant narrative device turned an impersonal historical mystery into an intimate journey of closure and redemption. Sutcliffe's portrayal was remarkably nuanced. She imagined the legion not simply being wiped out in a single battle, but being absorbed, their eagle becoming a revered tribal totem for the people who defeated them. This suggested a form of cultural merging, a more complex and poignant end than mere slaughter. The book's immense popularity, especially among younger readers, planted a powerful and enduring image in the public consciousness, that of the lone Roman venturing beyond the wall into a misty, dangerous, and spiritually potent landscape to reclaim a lost piece of Rome's spirit. This literary foundation was then spectacularly amplified for the big screen, most notably with the film The Eagle in 2011, based directly on Sutcliffe's novel. Cinema has the power to make legend visceral, and the film brought the theory of northern annihilation to life with stunning visual force. Audiences could see the grim, rain-lashed fortresses of Britain, feel the chilling isolation of the highlands, and witness the terrifying ferocity of the Seal people, the film's fictionalized representation of the Picts. The central image of the lost eagle, a gleaming bronze symbol of imperial power now hidden away in a dark, sacred hut, became an unforgettable icon. the film leans heavily into the themes of honor, friendship across cultural divides, and the haunting weight of the past. It presents the Ninth's fate as a tragic, heroic last stand, a narrative that is emotionally satisfying and cinematically grand. By following the journey of Marcus and his British slave-turned-companion Esca, the story allows modern viewers to experience the mystery from the inside, to feel the dread and the hope of the search. While taking creative liberties, this adaptation cemented the "Lost in Scotland" theory as the dominant version of events in the popular mind, making the fate of the Ninth a story of action, adventure, and ultimate sacrifice under the brooding Caledonian skies. Another starkly different cinematic interpretation arrived just a year earlier with the film Centurion, which offered a grimmer, more visceral, and relentlessly violent take on the legend. This film posits a very specific and immediate catastrophe. It opens with the Ninth Legion being dispatched to rescue a captured Roman general, and then being systematically hunted and annihilated by the Picts, depicted here as near superhuman trackers and warriors. Centurion leans into the horror of the mystery, emphasizing the sheer terror of being a disciplined Roman soldier trapped in a landscape where those disciplines are useless. The focus is on survival and the brutal reality of guerrilla warfare, stripping away the romanticism of the quest narrative and replacing it with a desperate fight for life. This portrayal taps into the primal fear of being lost and hunted, presenting the Picts not as a noble people guarding a sacred relic, but as vengeful and brutal avengers. Where the Eagle is a mythic quest, Centurion is a survival thriller, and together they demonstrate the incredible flexibility of the core mystery. The same historical void can be filled with stories of honor and cultural understanding, or with tales of raw, savage violence, each resonating with different audience desires and fears. The influence of these stories extends far beyond the cinema, seeping into television documentaries, video games, and even online alternate history forums. Documentaries often use dramatic reconstructions heavily influenced by these films, showing legionaries marching in formation into an ambush, their red cloaks a stark contrast to the grey-green of the Scottish glens. Video games like Total War Roman 2 allow players to command the Ninth Legion themselves, to rewrite its history on a digital battlefield, either leading it to a glorious death or steering it to a different, triumphant fate. This interactive element gives the public a sense of ownership over the legend, a chance to play with the possibilities in a way that history books never allow. Online, the mystery fuels endless speculation and debate, with enthusiasts dissecting every new archaeological find and arguing the merits of the British annihilation theory versus the Eastern transfer hypothesis with the passion of detectives on a 2,000-year-old cold case. This vibrant ecosystem of modern interpretation ensures the Legion story remains alive and evolving, constantly being reimagined for new generations. The collective power of these cultural portrayals has fundamentally shaped how we, in the modern world, perceive the Roman Empire and its frontiers. The legend of the Ninth has become a foundational pillar of the Celtic mystique, reinforcing the image of northern Britain as a land of ancient magic, indomitable spirit, and impenetrable mystery. It casts the Romans not as an unstoppable force of civilization, but as vulnerable, overextended, and ultimately humbled by a land and a people they could never truly understand. This narrative is profoundly appealing because it is a story of the underdog, of the resilience of local cultures against a globalizing superpower. The Lost Legion has become a potent symbol of the limits of imperial power, a reminder that even the greatest empires have edges where their control frays and their knowledge fails. Every time we watch a film, read a book, or play a game about the Ninth, we are not just entertaining a historical what-if. We are participating in a modern myth-making process, one that uses the silence of the past as a canvas to explore our own fascination with loss, heroism, and the haunting idea of a world that can simply swallow 5,000 men without a trace. This profound silence from the earth itself is one of the most frustrating and yet revealing aspects of the entire mystery. We are conditioned by stories and cinema to expect a dramatic, tangible conclusion to such an epic tale: a scattered field of bones, a mass grave filled with Roman armor, a single, broken eagle standard lying amidst the debris of a final stand. Yet, for the Ninth Legion, no such smoking gun has ever been found. This archaeological void is not for a lack of looking. Generations of archaeologists have walked the hills of northern Britain, scanned the lines of Roman marching camps with aerial photography, and excavated countless sites, all in the hope of finding the legion's physical remains. The fact that they have not forces us to confront a more complex reality and ask what this absence of evidence might truly signify. Consider for a moment the nature of a catastrophic military defeat in the ancient world. If the legion was ambushed and wiped out in a remote Caledonian glen, what would realistically remain for us to find 2,000 years later? The victors, the Pictish tribes, would have seen the Roman equipment as a treasure trove of high-quality metal. Every sword, spearhead, helmet, and mail shirt would have been eagerly scavenged. The iconic eagle standard and the unit's other ceremonial insignia would have been the ultimate prizes, likely taken as war trophies and perhaps deposited in a sacred bog or lake as an offering to their gods, a practice well documented in Celtic Europe. The bodies of the slain, left on the surface, would have been quickly disarticulated by scavengers and the elements. Within a few years, perhaps only a few scattered bones and the occasional lost coin or broken hobnail from a sandal would remain, all of which could easily be missed by archaeologists or explained away as evidence of a smaller skirmish. A single, definitive battlefield is therefore a historical luxury. It requires a very specific set of circumstances to be preserved, such as the site being abandoned immediately after the conflict and never disturbed again, a scenario that is far from guaranteed in the constantly contested landscapes of the North. This leads to a second, more haunting possibility, that the battlefield, if it exists, lies in a place we have not yet thought to look, or in an environment that has actively hidden it. Northern Britain is a landscape in constant motion. Peat bogs grow and swallow entire landscapes, rivers change their courses over centuries, and soil erosion can cover or expose artifacts in unpredictable ways. A site of a major battle could be buried under several feet of peat, perfectly preserving organic materials like wood and leather, but hiding them from view without extensive and targeted scientific survey. Alternatively, the final engagement might not have been a single, set-piece battle at all. The legion could have been broken apart in a series of running fights over many miles, its men dying in small groups across a wide area. In this scenario, there is no central, mass grave to discover, only a diffuse scattering of evidence that is archaeologically invisible against the general background noise of Roman military activity in the region. The silence, then, might not mean there was no disaster, but that the disaster was of a kind that leaves only a faint, scattered signature on the land. Conversely, the absence of a mass grave could be pointing us toward the other major theory, that the legion met its end not in Britain but elsewhere. If the Ninth was indeed transferred to the continent and eventually destroyed in the Armenian mountains or dissolved after the Bar Kokhba revolt, we would naturally find no concentrated evidence of its demise in the soil of Scotland. The archaeological silence in Britain would, in this case, be a simple and direct reflection of historical reality. They weren't there when the final blow fell. Their equipment would have been lost or repurposed in the deserts of the Near East, their bones left to bleach under a foreign sun. This interpretation turns the lack of evidence from a puzzle into a clue, suggesting that our search for answers has been focused on the wrong theater of war all along. The very emptiness becomes our argument for looking beyond Hadrian's Wall. Yet, perhaps the most profound implication of this archaeological silence is that it holds up a mirror to our own expectations. We yearn for a clear, dramatic end for the Ninth Legion because it provides narrative closure. We want a story, but history, especially ancient history, is often messy, incomplete, and resistant to our desire for neat conclusions. The silence forces us to consider less cinematic but equally plausible fates. Could the legion have been so severely mauled in a campaign that its remaining men were simply merged into other units, their identity erased not by a single sword stroke but by an imperial decree? The gradual disbandment of a legion, while a significant administrative act, leaves little for an archaeologist to unearth beyond a change in the pattern of tile stamps and a new name on fort inscriptions. The lack of a battlefield could be pointing us toward a bureaucratic rather than a military oblivion. In the end, the empty ground speaks to us not of what happened, but of all the things that could have happened, preserving the mystery not through what is buried, but through what was never buried at all. For scholars who advocate the theory of the legion's violent destruction, the starting point is a simple, powerful question of logic and military psychology. Why would the Roman army, an institution built on tradition, honor, and meticulous record-keeping, simply allow one of its most storied formations to vanish from its official rolls without a trace? To these historians, the silence itself is not an absence of evidence, but rather the most damning evidence of all. It points toward a catastrophe so profound, so humiliating, that the imperial administration made a conscious decision to bury the truth, to let the legion's name fade into obscurity rather than publicly acknowledge a defeat that could embolden enemies across the empire. The very prestige of the Ninth Hispana makes its quiet administrative deletion without any fanfare or recorded reason deeply suspicious. A legion with such an illustrious history dating back to Julius Caesar doesn't just get quietly retired like an old piece of furniture. Its end would have been a significant event, and a catastrophic one is the only kind that logically explains the profound and enduring silence. The argument hinges on the Roman military mindset and their well-documented precedents for handling disaster. We need only look to the ghost of the Teutoburg forest, where 3 entire legions under Varus were annihilated by Germanic tribes in 9 AD. The impact of that event was seismic. The Emperor Augustus was said to have roamed his palace, beating his head against the walls and crying, "Quintili ver legions red." "O Varus, give me back my legions." In the aftermath, those 3 legion numbers, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, were never used again. They were expunged from the army lists, their memory a permanent stain of shame and a cautionary tale. This provides a clear blueprint for how Rome dealt with the complete destruction of a military unit. The silence was deliberate, a form of damnatio memoriae aimed at a military formation. Proponents of the destruction theory argue that the disappearance of the Ninth fits this pattern perfectly. A single lost legion, while a massive blow, was more containable than the loss of 3. A governor or emperor keen to project an image of invincibility and stability would have had every incentive to suppress the news, to officially list the legion as disbanded or transferred, while the grim reality was known only to a few in the high command. The absence of the Ninth from the building inscriptions of Hadrian's Wall, then, is not a mystery of relocation but a confirmation of its prior annihilation. The wall itself can be seen as a direct strategic response to the kind of devastating defeat the Ninth likely suffered, a move from aggressive expansion to fortified defense prompted by a painful lesson learned in blood. Furthermore, these scholars point to the specific political and military context of Britain in the early 2nd century as a tinderbox ready to ignite. The Roman hold on the north was always tenuous, a thin veneer of control over recently conquered and deeply resentful tribes like the Brigantes. While the great victory at Mons Gropius had broken the large-scale power of the Caledonian confederations, it did not eradicate the threat. The Pictish tribes remained fiercely independent in their highland fortresses, and the decades following Agricola's recall would have been filled with the kind of low-level insurgency that wears down even the most disciplined army. It is entirely plausible that in the reign of Trajan or Hadrian, a new, charismatic war leader emerged, uniting the northern tribes into a force far more formidable than any previously encountered. The ninth, as the legion stationed at the northernmost major fortress of Eboracum, would have been the logical first responder, marching out on a punitive campaign to crush this new coalition. Overconfident and underestimating their enemy, much like Varus in Germany, they could have been lured deep into treacherous terrain and ambushed. The landscape of Caledonia, with its narrow glens, dense forests, and trackless bogs, was the perfect place to nullify the Roman advantages of discipline and heavy armor. In such a setting, the legion could have been surrounded and systematically destroyed, its formations broken by a relentless enemy that refused to fight a set-piece battle. The logistical and cultural aftermath of such an event also supports the destruction theory. The victors would have stripped the battlefield clean. Every piece of Roman iron, every sword, spear, and mail shirt would have been priceless booty. The legion's paid chest would have been seized, and most symbolically powerful of all, its eagle standards would have been captured. These golden eagles were not just military insignia, they were the sacred soul of the legion, believed to be under the direct protection of Jupiter. Their loss was the ultimate disgrace. In the Celtic tradition, such powerful trophies were often offered to the gods, deposited in sacred bogs, lakes, or hidden groves. This would explain why no concentrated battlefield with thousands of Roman bodies and equipment has ever been found. The site was meticulously scavenged, and the most significant artifacts ritually hidden in places archaeologists may never discover. The combination of a humiliating defeat, the loss of sacred eagles, and the strategic need to maintain a facade of imperial strength created a perfect storm for a cover-up. The Roman state, in this view, chose to let the Ninth Legion become a ghost, its name whispered only in rumor because the truth was simply too damaging to admit. For these historians, the romantic legend and the historical probability align. The Ninth marched into the mists of Caledonia and met a sudden, violent, and total end, an event whose shadow was so long it prompted the construction of a wall and the erasure of a legion's name from history. Yet for every historian who sees the silence as proof of a cataclysm, another listens closely and hears a different story, not of a dramatic end but of a quiet departure. These scholars advocate for the transfer theory, building a compelling case not on the ghost of a battle, but on the cold, hard realities of imperial logistics and the frustratingly incomplete nature of our historical record. Their argument begins by asking us to reimagine the Roman Empire not as a static collection of provinces, but as a dynamic, interconnected organism, constantly shifting its military resources to meet the most pressing threats of the moment. A legion was the ultimate strategic asset, and during the reign of an expansionist emperor like Trajan, these assets were moved across the map with a pragmatism that could easily explain the Ninth's disappearance from Britain without a single drop of blood being shed in a northern ambush. The core of this argument rests on the well-documented military crises of the early 2nd century. While Britain was a troublesome frontier, it was often seen as a strategic backwater compared to the rich, volatile East. Trajan's two massive wars against the Parthian Empire, fought between 114 and 117, were among the largest military undertakings in Roman history. These campaigns demanded a huge concentration of legions, and historical records confirm that Trajan drafted units from all over the empire to fill his invasion armies. He pulled legions from the German and Danube frontiers, creating a vacuum that needed to be filled. To a pragmatic emperor and his military advisors, the solution was obvious: pull a legion from a quieter, though still unstable, province like Britain and send it east. The Ninth Hispana, as a veteran and reliable formation, would have been a prime candidate for such a reassignment. In this scenario, the legion was not marched to its doom in a Caledonian glen, but was given orders to break camp at Eboracum. They would have packed their standards, their pay chests, and their equipment, marching south to the legionary port at Richborough, where a fleet of transport ships awaited to carry them across the Channel. Their subsequent journey would have been a long but orderly overland march across Gaul, perhaps to the Rhine frontier for a temporary posting before the final, grueling trek to the deserts of Mesopotamia. This theory reframes the entire mystery from a "what happened" to a "where did they go next?", suggesting the answer lies not in the soil of Scotland, but on the long roads of the empire. Proponents of the transfer theory also force us to confront the profound fragmentation of our historical sources. Our understanding of Roman Britain in the early 2nd century is like trying to assemble a vast jigsaw puzzle with 90% of the pieces missing. The primary narrative historian for this period, Tacitus, falls silent after his account of Agricola's governorship ends around the year 84. For the next several decades, precisely the period when the 9th vanishes, we have no continuous historical narrative for Britain. We are reliant on tiny fragments, brief mentions in the biographies of emperors, and scattered archaeological clues. The absence of a recorded disaster for the 9th, in this view, is not evidence of a cover-up, but simply a reflection of the fact that no historian whose work has survived was particularly interested in or informed about British affairs during those specific years. If a tree falls in a forest and no one is there to write it down, does it make a sound? From the perspective of the surviving historical record, the answer for the 9th Legion could very well be no. Its fate was not dramatic enough to warrant a mention in the court histories of Rome, which were far more focused on the glorious Eastern Wars and the machinations of the imperial succession. This perspective is bolstered by the presence of that tantalizing, debated piece of evidence, the roof tile fragment from Nijmegen in the Netherlands. While its interpretation is contested, its very existence is a powerful reminder that evidence can appear in unexpected places. If the stamp does indeed read Leg VIH, it places the legion alive and well on the European continent after the time it was supposed to have vanished in Britain. This single, fragile piece of baked clay becomes a cornerstone of the transfer argument. It suggests the legion's stop at the Rhine fortress was a temporary one, a staging post on its long journey east. The fact that their familiar tile stamps disappear from York is thus no longer a mystery. It is a simple consequence of their relocation. Their old fortress was handed over to a newly arrived legion, the 6th Victrix, whose presence in Britain is firmly attested from this period onward. The 9th's conspicuous absence from the building inscriptions of Hadrian's Wall is therefore perfectly logical. They weren't there to build it because they were thousands of miles away, likely building fortifications on a different, more volatile frontier. But if the legion was transferred, how then do we explain its ultimate disappearance from the army lists? The transfer theory offers a range of plausible, if less cinematic, fates. The legion could have been so severely depleted during Trajan's grueling Parthian campaigns or the bloody Jewish revolts that followed under Hadrian that it was simply no longer combat effective. Roman military administration was ruthlessly practical. If a legion's manpower fell below a sustainable level, its remaining soldiers could be absorbed into other legions as reinforcements, and its number retired. This kind of gradual dissolution through attrition was a recognized administrative process, one that would not necessarily have been deemed worthy of a specific note in the grand historical chronicles. Its name would have been quietly removed from the official army roster, the Laticulum, and that would have been that. The silence in the record, therefore, is not the silence of trauma, but the silence of bureaucratic efficiency. The legion didn't vanish in a fiery catastrophe. It faded away through 1,000 cuts in a distant desert war, its end as practical and unremarkable as its long and storied beginning was glorious. Ultimately, the enduring power of the 9th Legion story lies not in the historical facts we possess, but in the profound, echoing silence where those facts should be. It is a mystery that transcends archaeology and enters the realm of myth because it speaks to universal themes that resonate across centuries. At its heart, the tale of the Ninth is a stark lesson in the fragility of imperial power. The Roman Empire, for all its roads, its laws, and its seemingly invincible legions, had edges both geographical and situational beyond which its control simply frayed and snapped. The legion's disappearance is a potent symbol of that limitation. It reminds us that no system, no matter how sophisticated or powerful, is immune to the chaotic, unpredictable forces of the unknown. An empire that could project its might from the sands of Syria to the reigns of Britain could still lose 5,000 of its best soldiers without a single clear explanation, a humbling testament to the fact that the map is never the territory, and the bureaucratic ledger is never the full story of what happens on the ground. This touches directly on another deep-seated human anxiety, the limits of our own knowledge. We live in an age of information saturation where we expect answers to be readily available. The story of the Ninth Legion defiantly resists this modern expectation. It is a 2,000-year-old cold case that stubbornly refuses to be solved. This unresolved nature is deeply compelling. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that the past is not a neatly organized library, but a vast landscape where most of the signposts have been worn away by time. We are left with fragments, a stamped tile, a cryptic line from a historian, a silent space on a wall's inscription, and from these we must construct a narrative. The mystery, therefore, becomes a mirror reflecting our own desire for order and closure. We are the ones who feel the need to know what happened, to fill the void with either the logic of a strategic transfer or the drama of a heroic last stand. The Legion's fate becomes a canvas onto which we project our own understandings of history, of tragedy, and of destiny. This leads us to the undeniable romantic allure of the noble defeat. There is a reason why the theory of a catastrophic ambush in the Scottish mists has so thoroughly captured the public imagination, while the idea of a bureaucratic transfer feels somehow unsatisfying. We are drawn to stories of tragic heroism, the image of a disciplined professional force marching in perfect order into a fog-shrouded glen, to be overwhelmed by a fierce and passionate native army, is cinematically powerful and emotionally resonant. It is a story of hubris and nemesis, of the civilized world being humbled by the wild. This narrative transforms the legionaries from faceless soldiers into tragic figures, their end giving their story a poignant, dramatic weight that a simple reassignment order could never provide. We remember the Spartans at Thermopylae not for their victory, but for their defiant stand in the face of certain death. In a similar, though quieter way, the lost Ninth has become Rome's Thermopylae, a story where the manner of the loss becomes more important than the victory it prevented. This romanticism is further amplified by the potent symbolism of the lost eagle standard. In the Roman worldview, the eagle was far more than a flag. It was the literal soul of the legion, a sacred object entrusted by Jupiter himself. Its loss was the ultimate military and spiritual disgrace. The idea that this golden eagle, this symbol of ultimate order and imperial power, could have been captured and hidden away in some dark, peat-stained bog or tribal chieftain's hut is a powerful inversion. It represents the triumph of the chaotic, the unknown, and the indigenous over the rigid structure of empire. The quest to recover the eagle, so brilliantly fictionalized in novels and films, taps into this deep symbolism. It is not just a search for a piece of metal, it is a quest for lost honor, for closure, and for the reclamation of a stolen soul. The eagle's absence echoes the legion's own, a dual disappearance that makes the mystery infinitely more haunting. Finally, the story of the Ninth Legion endures because it is, in its essence, a profound ghost story. It is not about specters that rattle chains, but about the ghost of a historical presence, the echo of a community that was here one day and gone the next. The local folklore of York, with its tales of hearing the phantom tramp of sandaled feet on a misty road, perfectly captures this. The land itself seems to remember. These stories are a way for the human imagination to grapple with an unresolved trauma, to give a face to the void. The legend allows the 5,000 men of the Ninth to achieve a kind of immortality. They are forever suspended in that moment of marching into the unknown, forever brave, forever united, forever just beyond our reach. They are no longer just a line on a missing military roster. They have become eternal archetypes. In the end, we keep telling their story not because we expect to find a definitive answer, but because the act of searching for one connects us to the vast, beautiful, and terrifying mystery of the past itself. The Lost Ninth Legion teaches us that some stories are more powerful for remaining unfinished, their silence a more compelling narrative than any conclusion we could ever write. While the official records fell silent, the land itself seems to have held onto a memory of the missing legion, a persistent echo that has seeped into the very stones of York and blossomed into a rich tapestry of local folklore. Long after the last Roman administrator packed his scrolls and departed, the people who continued to live in the shadow of the great fortress at Eboracum began to tell stories. They spoke of encountering something not quite of their own time, a presence that felt ancient, disciplined, and profoundly lost. These aren't the grand, national legends of Arthurian betrayal, but more intimate, chilling tales passed down through generations, suggesting that the spirit of the Ninth Legion never truly left its long-time home. The most common and evocative of these stories centers on the old Roman road that leads north out of the city, a route the Legion would have marched countless times on their way to the frontier. On certain nights, particularly when a thick, cold mist rolls in from the river Ouse, locals whisper of hearing things that shouldn't be there. It starts as a low, rhythmic vibration felt through the ground more than heard with the ears, a distant, muffled drumbeat marking time. Then comes the sound, a phantom cadence of thousands of leather sandals striking the ancient gravel in perfect, unnerving unison. Listeners describe a faint jingle of metal, the creak of leather straps, and the collective sigh of breath from a vast, invisible column on the move. Those who claim to have witnessed this spectral march say it is not a sight to be seen, but an experience to be felt, a wave of cold air, a pressure change, and an overwhelming sense of melancholy purpose, as if the ghost of the Legion is forever rehearsing its final, fateful departure, condemned to retrace the first steps of a journey from which they never returned. Within the city itself, the ghost of the Legion takes on a more personal, solitary form. The ancient, snickelways and narrow medieval streets of York are built directly atop the Roman ruins, and in certain cellars and beneath certain buildings, the original Roman stonework still survives. It is in these deep, forgotten places that another kind of apparition is said to appear. Unlike the collective march on the road, this is the ghost of a single legionary. He is often described as a figure in tarnished armor, looking weary and confused, sometimes seen standing guard in a corner that hasn't existed for 17 centuries, or simply wandering as if trying to find his way back to a barracks that was torn down long ago. In some versions of the tale, he is headless, a common folkloric motif for a spirit that cannot find peace, perhaps because his body was never given proper rites on a distant battlefield. This lone soldier represents the individual human tragedy within the larger mystery. He is every man who served, every son and father who left for the north and simply vanished from the lives of those who knew them. His perpetual, bewildered presence reminds us that the loss of the Ninth was not just the loss of a military unit, but the loss of thousands of personal stories, loves, and futures, all cut short and left unresolved. He is the soul of the Legion, anchorless and eternally waiting for an order to stand down that will never come. The endurance of these stories speaks to a deep, almost primal human need to explain the unexplainable and to give form to absence. A mystery as profound as the disappearance of 5,000 people creates a vacuum, and nature, along with human imagination, abhors a vacuum. folklore rushes in to fill the empty space with narrative. When a community lives for generations among the physical remnants of a great, unexplained event, the looming Roman walls, the hidden mosaic floors, the straight roads leading to a dangerous north, it is only natural for that event to become woven into the local identity. The ghost stories are not merely fanciful tales, they are a form of psychological archaeology. They are the way the collective memory of a place processes a trauma that is too large and too old to be understood through documents alone. The people of York, walking the same streets and looking out toward the same northern hills, internalized the mystery. The Phantom March and the Lonely Sentinel are their way of keeping the question alive, of ensuring that the Lost Legion is not forgotten, even if the means of remembrance is a shiver in the dark on a foggy night. It is a tribute in its own way, a promise from the living to the dead that their story still matters, that their absence is still felt, and that they are still, in some spectral fashion, waiting for their rest. As you let the facts and theories drift through your mind, settling into a gentle rhythm, let us now quiet the scholarly debate and simply listen to the land itself. Let your imagination wander away from the stone inscriptions and the tile stamps, and travel instead to the ancient, enduring landscapes of Britain, for it is in these very places, in the soil, the mist, and the silence that the deepest echoes of the Legion's story reside. Picture the land not as it is today with its modern cities and roads, but as it was 2,000 years ago, a vast, wild, and whispering world. Begin with the great fortress of Eboracum, now the city of York. In your mind's eye, let the modern buildings fade, replaced by the formidable stone walls and timber gates of the Roman fort. See the legionaries not as ghosts, but as living men, their breath misting in the chill morning air as they stand watch on the ramparts. Their gaze is fixed to the north, down the long, straight ribbon of the Roman road that stretches into a seemingly endless expanse of forest and hill. That road was their lifeline and their path to destiny, a man-made scar on a primordial landscape, and it is down that road they marched one final time, leaving a silence behind them that the land has never forgotten. Now follow that road northward in your thoughts. Let the ordered world of the fortress recede and feel the change in the atmosphere. The air grows colder and damper. The dense, deciduous forests of the south give way to a more open, rugged country of rolling hills and wide, windswept moors. This is the land of the Brigantes, a territory of immense skies and hidden valleys. Here, the silence is different. It is not empty but watchful. Imagine the Legion marching here, a column of 5,000 men that would have stretched for miles. The only sounds are the rhythmic crunch of their studded sandals on the gravel, the occasional snort of a horse, and the muffled commands of their centurions. They are a spectacle of order and power, their red cloaks and gleaming armor a shocking burst of color against the muted greens, browns, and grays of the moorland. But the land seems to absorb their noise, swallowing the sound of their passage into its vastness. The heather-clad hillsides, which can hide a man just by lying down, feel alive with unseen eyes. Every gorse bush, every outcrop of rock could conceal a scout from a hostile tribe. This is a landscape that invites ambush, a place where a massive, disciplined force can feel strangely vulnerable, its very size making it a perfect target in a land that favors the stealthy and the swift. Continue north further still, and the land rises and contorts into something even more ancient and formidable. You have now entered the threshold of Caledonia, the Scottish Highlands. This is a world shaped by ice and time, a place of brooding, dramatic beauty that can turn treacherous in an instant. Envision the mist, the famous Scottish Har, rolling in from the sea, clinging to the glens and reducing the world to a small, damp circle of visibility. In this mist, sound becomes distorted and vision is useless beyond a few dozen paces. A legion marching in such conditions would be blinded, its cohesion broken as each century struggled to keep sight of the one in front. The ground underfoot is no longer a firm Roman road, but a treacherous mix of spongy peat bog, slippery wet grass, and sharp, hidden rocks. Imagine the weight of a legionary's pack, 60 pounds or more, as his feet sink into the mire with each step, the cold, black water seeping over the tops of his leather shoes. The sheer physical exhaustion of such a march is palpable, a constant drain on morale and strength. The towering, dark mountains on either side of the glen feel like the walls of a natural fortress, and you, the listener, can feel the sense of confinement, of being funneled into a place not of your choosing. This is the landscape that holds the secret. It is a land perfectly designed to erase evidence. Think of the peat bogs, those vast, soggy fields of accumulated plant matter that have been growing for millennia. A bog is a natural preservative, but also a perfect hiding place. A body, a piece of equipment, even an entire eagle standard, could be cast into its dark, acidic waters and sink without a trace, swallowed for centuries. The rivers, swollen with rain, could have carried away the debris of a battle, scattering armor and bones across their stony beds and out to sea. The dense, damp forests would have quickly reclaimed any clearing, their roots and fallen leaves covering the scars of conflict within a few short years. This is why the land gives up so few of its secrets. It is not being stubborn, it is simply being itself. The same elements that made it so difficult for the Romans to conquer, the mist, the bog, the forest, the relentless weather, are the very elements that have conspired to protect the truth of what happened. The highlands are the perfect custodian for a mystery, patient and silent, keeping its story locked within the peat and the granite. So, as you drift closer to sleep, let go of the need for an answer. Instead, just rest in the atmosphere of these ancient places. Feel the chill of the mist on your skin, smell the damp earth and the rotting leaves, hear the distant cry of a bird of prey echoing in a lonely glen. This sensory experience is, in its own way, a connection to the past as real as any history book. The Roman Ninth Legion, for all its discipline and engineering might, was ultimately a temporary presence in an ancient and enduring land. The mountains and the mists were here long before the first legionary set foot in Britain, and they remain long after the last one vanished. The land does not care about our mysteries, it simply is. And in its timeless, breathing presence there is a deep and profound peace. The fate of the 5,000 men may be hidden in the soil, but the landscape itself is their memorial, a vast, silent, and beautiful tombstone under the northern sky. Let the weight of that antiquity lull you, the steady, patient presence of the hills and the moors easing your mind into a state of quiet wonder, and finally into restful sleep. But the legacy of the Ninth Legion and of the Roman army as a whole may be written not just in stone and story, but in the very fabric of the British people themselves. This leads us to a deeply personal and fascinating question that connects this ancient mystery directly to our own lives. Could the genetic descendants of those lost Roman soldiers still be walking the streets of modern Britain today? The idea that the blood of a legionary from Italy or North Africa might flow through the veins of someone living in York or London is a powerful one, transforming an abstract historical puzzle into a matter of personal ancestry. The Romans were not just a fleeting military presence. For nearly 4 centuries, they were a settled population, and soldiers were often the vanguard of that settlement. A Roman legionary served for 25 years, and for much of that time he was forbidden from legally marrying. Yet, human nature being what it is, he frequently formed long-term relationships with local women, establishing families just outside the fortress walls in the bustling civilian settlements. When he retired, he was often granted a plot of land and a pension, settling down permanently in the province he had once been sent to conquer. These veterans, along with the merchants, craftsmen, and officials who followed the legions, became a permanent part of the demographic landscape, their DNA slowly mixing with that of the native Celtic tribes over generations. Modern genetic science has given us the tools to investigate this very question, and the results are both revealing and complex. Large-scale studies of the Y chromosome, which is passed down virtually unchanged from father to son, have indeed identified specific genetic markers that are common in modern-day men from Italy and the Iberian Peninsula, but are also found at intriguingly higher rates in certain parts of England and Wales, particularly in regions with a strong history of Roman settlement. This suggests a tangible, measurable influx of male Roman ancestry. However, it is crucial to temper this exciting idea with scientific caution. It is genetically impossible to distinguish the DNA of a soldier from the 9th Legion from that of any other Roman soldier, settler, or official who came to Britain from the Mediterranean region. The genetic signal we see is a collective one representing the entire Romano-British population over hundreds of years, not the unique signature of a single lost legion. Furthermore, the subsequent waves of migration to Britain, the Angles, Saxons, Jutes, Vikings, and Normans, each added their own layers to the genetic mix, meaning that any Roman ancestry in a modern Britain is just one thread in an incredibly rich and tangled tapestry. So, while we cannot point to a specific individual and say they are a direct descendant of a soldier of the 9th Hispana, we can say with confidence that the Roman occupation left a lasting genetic imprint on the British people. The men who built the forts, marched the roads, and guarded the frontiers did not simply vanish when the last legions were recalled. Many of their lines simply continued, their descendants adapting and surviving through the Saxon period, the Viking raids, and the Norman conquest, their Roman origins gradually forgotten but their genetic legacy persisting. This transforms the mystery from a story of absolute loss to one of quiet integration. The 5,000 men of the 9th may have disappeared as a cohesive military unit, but if they met a gradual end through attrition or were absorbed after a transfer, it is entirely plausible that their individual genetic lines merged with the local population, their story continuing not in history books, but in the unbroken chain of descent that leads to the present day. This intertwining of history and genetics invites a profound shift in perspective. The next time you walk through an English city like York or Chester, with their medieval streets laid over Roman foundations, consider the layers of life beneath your feet. The ghost of the 9th Legion is not just a phantom march on a misty road. It is potentially a living, breathing presence in the people around you. It is in the dark hair and brown eyes that might hint at a Mediterranean ancestor, or in a surname that, unbeknownst to its bearer, echoes a Latin origin. This connection makes the past feel immediate and personal. The great movements of history are not just about empires and armies. They are about individual people making choices, forming families, and leaving a legacy that is carried forward in the most intimate way possible through our very selves. The silence surrounding the 9th's official fate is countered by this biological whisper, a subtle but enduring reminder that history is not something that happened then to them, but a continuous process that has shaped who we are now. The Legion may be lost to the records, but in a very real sense, a part of it may have never left Britain at all, becoming an inseparable strand in the nation's DNA, a silent and ancient witness to the deep and unexpected connections that bind our present to the distant past. To my dearest Claudia, if this letter finds its way to you, know that it carries with it all the love and longing of a heart that beats for you across this vast and lonely distance. I write to you not from the familiar comfort of our fortress at Eboracum, but from a temporary marching camp somewhere deep in the north, in a land the natives call Caledonia. The air here is different, wife. It is cold and wet, a dampness that seeps right through my woolen cloak and into my very bones, a chill that the braziers in our tent cannot hope to conquer. The mist is the most peculiar thing. It does not burn away with the dawn like an honest Italian fog. No, it clings to the high hills all day long, hiding their peaks, making the very landscape feel secretive and watchful. It is as if the land itself does not want us here. We have been marching for weeks now, and each day takes us further from any semblance of the world we know. The roads we built with such pride in the south have given way to narrow, winding tracks that are little more than sheep trails. Our progress is slow, our formations often broken by the treacherous ground. The men are quiet, more so than usual. There is no singing on the march anymore, only the sound of our labored breathing and the incessant squelch of our sandals in the boggy earth. I find myself glancing too often at the tree line, at the thick, dark forests of pine that crowd these hills. They say the tribes here paint their skin blue with woad, that they can move through these woods without making a sound. I have not seen them, not clearly, but I feel their eyes upon us. Sometimes at the edge of the mist, I think I see a figure standing, watching, only for it to be gone when I look again. It plays tricks on the mind. Do you remember old Gaius, the veteran centurion who used to tell such grand stories of the German campaigns? He sits by the fire now, saying very little. The confidence he always carried seems to have drained from him. Just yesterday he said to me, "This is not a war for legions, Lucius. This is a war for ghosts." I did not understand him then, but I think I am beginning to. We are trained to fight in open fields, to form our lines and break the enemy with a single, disciplined thrust, but here there is no enemy to meet. There are only rumors and shadows and the silence that follows the cry of a strange bird in the glen. It is a grinding away of the spirit. We build our marching camp each night with the same precision. We set the watches with the same routine, but the certainty that has always been the bedrock of a legionary's life feels thin here, like ice over a stream that may not hold our weight. I try to hold onto the memory of your face, the sound of our son's laughter. These thoughts are my talisman against the gloom. I think of the warmth of the sun on the hills near your father's farm, the taste of good wine, the solid, reassuring feel of the cobblestones in the forum at home. It all feels a world away, a dream from another life. We are told we are here to bring Roman order, to tame this wilderness, but this land does not wish to be tamed. It feels ancient, Claudia, older than the gods themselves, and it seems to resent our presence. There is a weight to this place, a heavy, brooding presence that sits on your chest in the dead of night. I cannot shake the feeling that we are being led, step by careful step, into a place from which there is no return. Do not fear for me, my love. I will do my duty as I always have. But know that my thoughts are forever with you and our little one, and that every mile we march north, my heart yearns a little more fiercely for the south, for home, for you. Whatever happens, carry that with you. And so, after all the evidence is weighed, after the theories of northern ambushes and eastern transfers are laid out side by side, we are left precisely where we began, standing at the edge of a historical void, peering into a silence that has lasted for nearly 2,000 years. The fate of the 9th Legion remains one of history's most perfect and enduring puzzles, a cold case from the ancient world that refuses to be closed. There is no definitive archaeological smoking gun, no single document that points a conclusive finger at its destiny. Every proposed solution, from the romantic to the pragmatic, ultimately rests on a foundation of inference, speculation, and the frustrating gaps in our knowledge. This is not a failure of scholarship, but rather the defining characteristic of the mystery itself. The Legion's story is a silhouette. We can see its outline clearly, but the details within that shape are lost to the darkness of time. This fundamental uncertainty, this lack of a neat and tidy answer, is not a weakness of the tale, but the very source of its profound and lasting power. Think of all the other great stories from the ancient world. We know how Caesar died, we know the outcome of the Punic Wars, we understand the administrative structure of the Roman Empire. These are stories with endings, with conclusions that allow us to file them away in our minds as completed chapters. The 9th Legion defies this categorization. It is a story without an ending, a narrative thread that is simply cut, leaving us to wonder forever about what happened in those final, unrecorded moments. This open-endedness creates a unique space for the imagination to flourish. A story that is solved is a story that is, in a sense, finished. its power becomes static, contained within the known facts. But a mystery that remains unsolved is perpetually alive, constantly inviting new interpretations, new debates, and new generations to ask the same compelling question: what happened? It is a conversation with the past that never has to end, a door that is always left slightly ajar, allowing the mists of Caledonia to seep through into our modern world. This enduring appeal touches on something deep within the human psyche: our innate fascination with the unknown and our desire for narratives that are larger than life. A clear, bureaucratic explanation, while perhaps historically likely, feels emotionally insufficient when weighed against the scale of the disappearance. The idea that 5,000 men, a complete community, could simply be erased from existence in a single, catastrophic event speaks to our fears of oblivion and our awe in the face of forces beyond our control. It transforms the legion from a historical subject into an archetype, a symbol of heroic sacrifice or tragic hubris. We are drawn to the dramatic possibility of a last stand because it gives the men of the Ninth a collective, purposeful end, a fate that feels worthy of their long and storied history. The silence of the records becomes, in this light, not an empty space, but a canvas upon which we can project our own understandings of tragedy, honor, and the fragile nature of even the most powerful civilizations. Ultimately, the Legion's mystery serves as a powerful and humbling reminder of the limits of our knowledge. In an age where information feels instantly accessible, the story of the Ninth Legion stands as a monument to all that we cannot and may never know. It teaches us that the past is not a clearly lit room that we can walk through at our leisure, but a vast landscape where most of the signposts have been worn away by the relentless passage of centuries. The silence surrounding the Ninth is a testament to the countless other stories, large and small, that have been utterly lost to time. Their disappearance forces us to sit with the discomfort of ambiguity, to accept that some questions may simply have no answers. And in doing so, it connects us more intimately to the people of the past than any settled history ever could. We are left, like them, staring into the mist, wondering, imagining, and feeling the chill of a mystery that will, in all likelihood, outlive us all. The Lost Ninth Legion is not just a historical event, it is a permanent question mark, and its enduring power lies in its graceful, eternal refusal to ever provide a final, satisfying period. And so we arrive at the heart of the enigma, a crossroads of history where the solid path of fact gives way to multiple trails of possibility, each leading into a different kind of darkness. The disappearance of the Ninth Legion is not a single story, but three powerful, competing narratives, each with its own compelling evidence and its own profound implications for how we view the Roman Empire and its limits. The first, and most deeply ingrained in our collective imagination, is the theory of annihilation in the misty highlands of Caledonia. This is the story of a catastrophic, single event, a legion drawn into a carefully laid trap by the Pictish tribes and wiped out to the last man. The appeal of this narrative is primal. It provides a clean, if horrifying, end, a dramatic finale worthy of a legion with such a long and proud history. It explains the administrative silence as a deliberate act of imperial face-saving, a cover-up of a humiliation so profound that Rome chose to erase the legion's name rather than admit to a defeat that could inspire rebellions across the empire. The very landscape of northern Britain, with its treacherous glens and swallowing peat bogs, seems to conspire to support this theory, offering a perfect, hidden grave for 5,000 men and their sacred eagles. But then there is the theory of transfer, a narrative grounded not in drama but in the cold, pragmatic realities of imperial logistics. This version of events removes the tragedy from the Scottish mists and places it on the long, dusty roads of the empire. Here, the Ninth was not destroyed but reassigned. It was pulled from its fortress at York to bolster the armies of Emperor Trajan for his massive wars against the Parthian Empire in the east. The tantalizing, debated roof tile from Nijmegen in the Netherlands serves as a ghost of a clue, a flicker of evidence that the legion was alive and well on the continent after its supposed vanishing date. In this scenario, the silence in Britain is not mysterious at all. It is simply the result of a relocation order. The legion's ultimate fate then becomes a different kind of mystery. Perhaps it was gradually bled white in the grueling campaigns in the deserts of Mesopotamia, or perhaps it was so decimated in the brutal Bar Kokhba revolt in Judea that its remaining soldiers were absorbed into other units and its number quietly retired. This is a death by bureaucracy and attrition, an end that, while less cinematic, aligns perfectly with the ruthless efficiency of the Roman military machine. The third compelling theory attempts to bridge the gap between the romantic and the pragmatic, offering a specific historical event to hang the mystery upon. This points to a single, cryptic line from the historian Cassius Dio, who records the annihilation of an entire Roman legion in Armenia during the early reign of Marcus Aurelius around the year 161. Dio does not name the legion, creating a perfect, legion-shaped hole in the historical record that the missing ninth seems destined to fill. This theory suggests the legion was indeed transferred east, only to meet its end not in a gradual decline, but in a single, disastrous battle against the Parthians, commanded by an incompetent general and surrounded in the harsh, mountainous terrain of the Near East. This provides a documented, catastrophic end, but one that occurred in a theater of war so distant from Britain that its connection to the Ninth was lost to the Western historians who were our primary sources. It is an end that carries the weight of historical record, yet still retains the finality of a total and devastating military defeat. The enduring power of this mystery, however, lies not in which theory we choose to believe, but in what the collective silence of history tells us. The fact that we can entertain these three vastly different scenarios, a heroic last stand in Britain, a slow dissolution in the East, or a documented disaster in Armenia, speaks volumes about the fragmented nature of our knowledge. This silence is not an empty void, it is a resonant space that amplifies our questions. It reminds us that the Roman Empire, for all its meticulous record-keeping and monumental building projects, was a vast and often poorly documented entity, especially on its volatile frontiers. The complete disappearance of a legion, one of the empire's most precious and powerful assets, without a clear, contemporaneous account, is a staggering testament to the limits of ancient communication and the sheer scale of the world they inhabited. Ultimately, the fate of the Ninth Legion has been surrendered to our imagination. The lack of a definitive answer is what has allowed the legend to thrive for 2 millennia, transforming a military unit into an eternal ghost story. We are the ones who must choose the ending we find most compelling. Do we see them as tragic heroes marching in perfect discipline into a Caledonian ambush, their red cloaks a final defiant splash of color against the gray-green landscape? Or do we see them as pragmatic soldiers following orders to a different doom in a distant desert, their story fading away not with a bang, but with the quiet scratch of a bureaucrat's pen removing their name from a list? The silence of the historical record is an invitation. It asks us to ponder the fragility of power, the courage of individuals, and the countless stories that have been utterly lost to time. The truth of the Ninth Legion is now a ghost, forever marching just beyond the edge of our knowledge, its final destination known only to the wind, the rain, and the patient, enduring earth. So we leave them there, in that space between history and legend, the 5,000 men of the Ninth Hispana forever poised on the edge of the known world. We have followed their trail from the sun-baked fields of Gaul to the stone walls of Eboracum, and then into the great, silent expanse of the north, a journey that ends not with an answer, but with a question that has echoed for nearly 2,000 years. Whether they fell to Pictish spears in a mist-shrouded glen, faded away in the relentless grind of Eastern wars, or met a documented yet anonymous end in the Armenian mountains, their ultimate fate remains one of history's most captivating and elegant mysteries. They are a reminder that the past is not a simple collection of facts, but a vast landscape where some stories are written in stone and others are whispered only by the wind. The true legacy of the Ninth Legion may not be in the truth we can uncover, but in the enduring power of the mystery itself, a story that continues to captivate us precisely because it refuses to be solved. It invites us to wonder, to imagine, and to feel the profound connection to all the lives and stories that have been lost to the silence of time. Thank you for allowing this ancient tale to be your companion tonight. As you drift into sleep, let the echoes of marching legions soften into a gentle, distant rhythm, a lullaby of history that carries you toward peaceful dreams. May your rest be deep and your imagination wander through the misty landscapes of the past, safe in the knowledge that some mysteries are meant to endure. Good night.